whenever you're ready. It looks like it says we're now live streaming. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Maureen Lemassney, and I want to welcome you to this meeting of the Police Reform Work Group. I welcome not only our members, but also the public who are watching these proceedings. If you're joining us for the first time, our mission is to provide our County Executive, Angela Alsobrooks, with substantive recommendations that will establish fair practices across the board and restore public trust in law enforcement. The work group was not created to decide the merits of any pending or potential litigation, nor will the work group make any factual determinations in regard to any lawsuits or controversies. The work group was created to make recommendations regarding the policies of the Prince George's County Police Department and not to resolve, discuss, or comment upon any specific or alleged events. These policies include recruitment and retention, financial management, independent oversight, and internal policies. We've established 5 subcommittees to make recommendations in these areas. These recommendations are now due on December 4th. Our agenda tonight consists of presentations from the Prince George's County Crisis Response Team and the 911 call center. So, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Co-Chair Lemassney. Appreciate the opening comments. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for this meeting of the Prince George's County Police Reform Work Group. My name is Alonzo Washington, State Delegate for District 22 here in Prince George's County, and I serve as co-chair of the task force. We have now been meeting weekly for the past several months to begin to develop these recommendations. As a judge mentioned, we have held presentations and discussions on training, hiring practices, retention, use of force, the complaint process, and much more. Over the coming months, we will continue to hold presentations, solicit input from the community, and hear from local advocates to ensure that these recommendations are as comprehensive and substantial as possible. I encourage you to continue to reach out to us to share your thoughts and ideas on how we can make our county police a more effective and accountable organization. We are already considering some really bold and progressive proposals that will bring real meaningful change to Prince George's County. I am excited for the opportunity to be here tonight and look forward to another excellent discussion tonight as well. First, we will have Deputy Director Ms. Whittington of the 911 call center. Ms. Whittington.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having us tonight. We're a very integral part of public safety, and we're glad that we're able to present to you all today. I am Director Whittington. I'm the director of the Office of Homeland Security, which under its umbrella has Public Safety Communications, the Office of Emergency Management, and Critical Infrastructure Protection and Awareness Unit. Tonight, myself and Deputy Director Flaherty from the 911 call center will present to you an overview of the call center. So we're ready whenever Jonathan's ready to put up the presentation. Okay, are we ready? Can everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Again, this will be presented by myself and Deputy Director Flaherty. Jonathan, you can move to the next slide. This is an overview of public safety communications. I won't read it in full, but basically the 911 call center is a triple accredited agency. I'll wait.
I think we're almost there. Hey, Jonathan, I think you might want to just make it a larger, make the slides, go through the slide presentation.
It's a triple accredited center, and it's the 5th 911 dispatch center in the world to be ACE triple accredited. We provide dispatch to the Prince George's County Police, the Fire Department, EMS, Sheriff, and 18 other municipal police departments. Public safety communication strives to be professional and receives all 911 calls from county residents. We are a leader in the 911 industry, and we are titled in COMAR. It mandates that you have a sufficient number of call takers and equipment consistently to answer the daily average call in 10 seconds or less. Jonathan, next slide. And this is an overview of the structure. And I don't know if you all can see that very well. It starts at the top and it just gives an overall structure of the 911 call center. And as you can see, the director is at the top, and then underneath is the deputy director. And from there, it branches out. And at the bottom, you can see the division commanders, which are in charge of the dispatchers, the emergency call center, call takers. And then also we have a technical services division. In the technical services division, they install cameras in the police cars. They do all the maintenance for those in the police cars. So it's not just the 911 center. We provide other technical assistance to public safety as well. Next slide. Shar, if you want to go with that slide.
Thank you. Prince George's County Public Safety Communications is, as Director Whittington said, it's a division of Office of Homeland Security. And our mission is driven by, within 911, the need to meet the COMAR mandate that she mentioned for 911 call answer times. We provide timely professional 911 services to all county residents. And then we transfer emergency and non-emergency calls to the appropriate jurisdictions, such as Maryland State Police, WMATA, non-county jurisdictions, especially if they are misrouted. We gather critical information to ensure that first responders arrive on scene safe, and when they get there, they remain safe. For example, with every 911 call, we gather information about personnel that are within the homes or businesses or in the vehicles to determine if they have COVID symptoms. And we gather that information and we pass it on to all public safety personnel. We provide emergency assistance and pre-arrival instructions. We deliver babies. We provide CPR instruction. If it's a police emergency call or sheriff emergency call, we provide information on how to preserve evidence. We determine we ask basically what a first responder would ask when they got on scene. What's the direction of travel, information like that, so that the first responders are able to do their job quickly. We process alarm calls. So every time a burglar alarm goes off or a medical alarm goes off, that call comes into the 911 center. We process that and dispatch the appropriate personnel. We process non-emergent requests for public safety dispatch. So if somebody's garage was broken into 2 weeks ago, They would call on the non-emergency dispatch line, and we would process that call and dispatch first responders. We provide dispatch services to the first responders, police, fire, sheriff, EMS, and the municipal police departments. We provide training to our new and incumbent employees. The training process for new employees is quite extensive, and we make sure they meet all state mandated training and certification requirements, as well as training for incumbent employees to meet all certification requirements and renewals as required by the state. We maintain our accreditation quality assurance standards and all other aspects of the accreditation. That involves processing about 1,000 calls a month for quality assurance standards and maintaining that. We process and we are implementing next generation 911, and we maintain the radio system, the 911 system, the dispatch system, et cetera, and other public safety technology. We dispatch, we'll wait for the next slide. We process about 1.55 million incidents per year, and that includes the 911 calls, the alarm activations, non-emergency calls, calls into the dispatchers and supervisors with information requests from first responders. We strive to answer all 911 calls within 10 seconds or less. We recently were part of the statewide initiation of Text to 911, which we had been able to do that before, but now anywhere in the state of Maryland, you are able to enter a text to 911 for service. And one of the issues that we had discussed is the need for an emergency line, and the police department is implementing that. The chart on this slide gives an overview of the call volume that comes in and an example of the types of calls and the number of calls processed. We are one of the busiest centers in the region, only behind DC and Baltimore City. So as you can see, the numbers are quite high, processing about 750,000 911 calls in 2019. And we are on track, even though COVID has lots of businesses and homes. Everybody's changed their lifestyle, but the 911 call volume has remained steady. We have outgoing calls, and in case you're curious about that line item on the slide, that's transfers to other jurisdictions, callbacks. So if you call 911 and hang up, we do call back. That's one of the outgoing calls. And other calls for follow-up to residents requesting emergency services in case there's additional information that's required before first responders get on scene. Next slide. As we mentioned, we dispatch for all public safety, county police, fire, EMS, sheriff, and the municipal police departments. This slide shows the number of incidents that we process for those individual entities. Law enforcement, to include the municipal police departments, is in the first line. About 890,000 calls were dispatched in 2019. About 169,000 calls were dispatched for fire EMS. The PSC internal line that you see there, that's for transfers and duplicate calls. So if we receive a call from Maryland State Police, it's important that we track it to make sure that if the call is lost, or there is, in the transfer, or if there is an incident where we need to track it down backwards, say Maryland State Police couldn't respond, or they responded, but they needed additional information. We needed a way to preserve that information. And that's part of that PSC internal statistic. Next slide. We do face some challenges, but we have an excellent process. We have had excellent success in overcoming the challenges. Our greatest challenge has been staffing, and that is due mainly to the fact that there is a region-wide staffing need for 911 and dispatch personnel, and it's a very limited applicant pool. So everybody in the region is vying for the same applicant pool of talent. So and even if we are able to hire them, we have to be able to keep them. The other challenge is not a difficult challenge to overcome. It's that it requires extensive training. So once somebody is hired, they have to be taught how to do the job well so that we are protecting the residents of Prince George's County and making sure that the first responders are safe. So that requires some very intense training, and that involves 8 weeks of academic training to make sure that they receive all the certifications that are required by the state. And then there's training with on-the-job training so that they know what to do. The COVID pandemic has impacted our ability to backfill the vacancies. So that has created a challenge. And our salaries, that the entry-level salaries are not as high as some other jurisdictions. But we've had a lot of support in overcoming these challenges. We recently were able to provide a salary increase for 911 call takers by adjusting the probationary period to 6 months rather than 1 year. Training is complete within 6 months, so we were able to have that probationary period changed, which allowed the personnel, once they passed that probationary period, to get a salary increase. That has helped with the ability to retain staff. In 2018, we were able to get an across-the-board 10% salary increase for 911 and dispatch personnel. That helped quite a bit in the hiring and retention process. And we maintain the accreditation and quality assurance standards. That may not sound like a plus in the overcoming staffing challenges, but it provides a sense of pride for the people that are here, and they are able to have bragging rights with personnel within their peer groups. We have worked extensively with OHRM to streamline the hiring process, and they've been very supportive in this. One of the examples is something that we just started, which is online testing. Rather than having the applicant show up for an in-person testing, they're able to do it online, and it's been very successful. The best thing about overcoming the staffing challenges is we have some really awesome people here. They're very talented, they're very dedicated, and they're very professional. So as we encounter challenges, the people that work here work very hard to help everybody overcome these challenges. They are the best recruiters you could possibly have, and they're the best liaisons to the public safety agencies to make sure that there's an understanding with the other public safety agencies. Next slide. One of the other challenges that we don't have right now, but we will be facing, is getting ready for next generation 911. It is something that I know Delegate Washington was involved with as we testified to him last year regarding the need for additional funding for next generation 911 and legislation in preparation for this. and the state and the county have been very supportive in helping us prepare for this. Next Generation 911 is just going to change everything in the 911 world. We will be able to receive voice, text, photos, videos, multimedia information when somebody calls for assistance. Right now, it's limited to voice, so you can only call 911 and say, "Help, I need you, I need help," or send a text. But in the future, we will be able to receive a picture of somebody saying, "My house is on fire, the bank is being robbed, somebody just stole my car." Anything that you would possibly send a text message to your friends saying, "Hey, look at this new car I bought," you could send to 911. And that's going to change everything that we do, because it will involve a lot of analysis, storage for evidence, that type of thing. It's also going to increase the talent, the need for talent pool. It's going to change everything the way we do things. It's also going to change what happens in the public safety agencies. The imagery, the imagery that comes across as Next Generation 911, everybody knows or has heard about somebody committing a crime or doing something not very nice on Facebook and live streaming it and letting everybody see what horrible things they did. Right now, people call 911 and let us hear the horrible things they did. We are anticipating, the 911 industry is anticipating this happening with Next Gen, with live stream video. Even if it's not saying, something that they're doing, or, it's saying, "I need help with my friend who, got his leg caught in a lawnmower." That's not fun to look at. So there are, we anticipate increased stress because of that. But again, we've had lots of support. We are actively involved with the Commission to Advance Next Generation across Maryland, and there has been legislation introduced to help Prince George's County and the state of Maryland work through the challenges that we face with Next Generation 911. Next slide. The county also, and Director Whittington is very supportive of these things. She allowed us to use grant funding to do a study, a staffing study and a salary study, so that we could be prepared for Next Generation 911. And one of the things that is important to understand is when video comes across or photos, it's going to be more personnel intensive. And based on the personnel intensive aspect of this new way of doing things, the consultants recommended that we have additional staff. So as we move forward into the next gen world, we will work to gradually increase staffing within budgetary constraints, but gradually increase staffing so that we can meet this need on a proactive basis rather than a reactive basis. Next slide. One of the very important aspects and very supportive aspects is with Next Generation 911 is it is a county executive proud priority. So we are receiving focused attention on what needs to be done to move forward. As we mentioned, there was a consultant hired to review what we needed to be prepared for. We have stress management and mental health support. We are hiring a mental health support person through grant funding. He should be coming on board next month. We have cross-training planning in progress. We have already in place the planned technology that needs to be in place for Next Generation 911. We had that built into contracts several years ago. And The online testing process that has helped us hire throughout the COVID process also allows us to be more flexible and have focused skill sets. As we move into the next generation 911 process, we can adjust this in a much more flexible manner so that we can be prepared. And again, we are actively involved with the Commission to Advance Next Generation 911 across Maryland. And that's it. I'll turn it back over to Director Whittington.
Thank you, Deputy Director Flaherty. And that ends our presentation. And we'll take any questions you all might have.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. Any questions?
I have a,
Yeah, Delegate
Yes, go ahead.
Pastor Robertson. Yeah, I sat and met with Mrs. Whittington and Ms. Flaherty. I talked to the two of them. And one of the things I had hoped that they would point out is we did a look at 25 different jurisdictions, Prince George's County being the third busiest jurisdiction, but yet ranked number 19 when it comes to salaries. I think that's one of the problems that they're having that I see. After all of the training that they do, the 6-month training, the 10-month training, then you end up losing staff to other jurisdictions that are not as busy, but pay more money, number one. Number two, when you, they don't show the stats that we looked at for 2020, but through August of 2020, the same time last year, you 25,000 calls more than you had the same time last year at that same time. So the pool is kind of small. And I think it's very, very important to point out the fact that we need to be competitive with the salary base, or you will continue to lose out of this regional wide small pool that you are trying to compete with. You'll continue to lose staff. But I think it's very, very important that a recommendation be made to increase salaries to be competitive with the other 25 jurisdictions, because we're ranking number 19 out of 25 jurisdictions. And I talked with both Ms. Whittington and you know, I'm kind of waiting for one of them to support that point of view.
Oh, I was waiting for you to finish. I do
Yes,
support. I do support that point. Right now, we're losing quite a bit of our personnel to Bladensburg, Bowie, and St. Mary's counties. St. Mary's County in particular has actually changed their background process, where now they're just looking at the driver's license and things like that, because they figured that the criminal portion of the background has already done by the current employer. So they're just snatching people from us. We've trained them. And once we train them, the other jurisdictions, they know that we have awesome training and a lot of talent. So they just reach right over and snatch our personnel. And the reasons why they are leaving is because it is a lot of work, and they can go somewhere and get more pay for less work, or if they decide to go to a jurisdiction that pays around the same amount as we do, they don't have to do as much work. The people that we have there are very, very dedicated. We appreciate them. We understand the economic climate, but we also know that the call center is very important to Prince George's County overall. So we're doing everything that we can do to support our staff so that we can bring on new talent and also retain the talent that we have.
All right, thank you very much. Judge Lemassney?
First of all, congratulations on your accreditation. That is absolutely fabulous. And thank you for the great work you do. What are the minimum qualifications to be a dispatcher or a call taker?
The minimum qualifications to be a call taker is to have 1 year of productive experience. It is an entry-level position, and that is the only minimum qualification to come on board. You have to be able to pass a typing test. You have to be able to pass an entrance level exam. And that entrance level exam is the one we discussed with the online. And that mimics what life is like in the 911 center. You know, you take a typing test, you type really fast, and all of a sudden they come up and say, there's a red car going north. And then you have to pay attention to that. And then a couple minutes later, they're going to say, what color is the car and what direction were they going? So that's a very important aspect. To be a dispatcher, it is 10% higher salary, but it requires 1 year of dispatch experience in another jurisdiction, or 1 year of 911 or non-emergency call processing experience in another jurisdiction, or 1 year of experience with a two-way radio. So you could be a volunteer firefighter or police officer or something with security person. So it does require, it's not entry level, you have to have experience. And then there's a background check that they have to pass, which, you know, is very rigorous and it's very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Oriata.
Thank you. And before I get to my question, just a follow-up question to that one about just like to understand, like, would you say the issue is not enough people are applying, or the number of people applying aren't qualified?
I think it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of people that apply, but many of them don't make the minimum qualifications. So if you look at the job announcement, and it's logic, you have 2 jobs. I'm sorry, I'm speaking with my hands again. I was trying not to do that. You have 2 jobs that you can apply for. One starts out at 38,000, one starts out at 40. You say, I'm going to start out higher. But that one requires the 1 year of dispatch experience. So we end up with a lot of people applying for that, but not making the minimum qualifications. So it is a challenge. Normally, we have a very excellent HR person, and she will reach out to them sometimes and say, hey, you didn't qualify for a dispatcher, but maybe you should apply for a call taker. And the other challenge is making it through the background process. And the other challenges, as Director Whittington alluded to, is other jurisdictions are very streamlining their background process to get people on board faster. And we are not only in competition with them for the applicant pool, but to get them hired fast enough to be faster than everybody else. So normally people apply for Prince George's, Montgomery, DC, Charles County, and St. Mary's, and whoever's the fastest gets them. If that makes sense.
That's helpful. And when you talked about the dispatch system, I'm just curious, does the 911 operator dispatch the mobile crisis unit, or no, that decision does not lie with the 911 operators?
The 911 personnel only speak with residents. So when I speak of 911 call takers, they're the ones that take the call from the resident, processes it, puts it into the computer. The dispatcher will determine if the mobile crisis team is required based on criteria established by the police department.
So that would happen through 911. So they make the call if the mobile crisis unit is sent.
At the request of a police officer or sheriff's deputy.
So the request has to come from the officer first to send one. That decision can't be made specifically by 911.
Not normally, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great question. Next question is Keith Lottridge. And then last question will be from Ms. Josephine Morning.
I was a little curious. I saw, I think on slide 4, it stated that you guys maintain and service the radio system, the 911 dispatch. But you also included in that body camera and in-car camera. Are those the police body camera and in-car camera you guys maintain?
Yes.
Do you maintain the records for those as well, or?
No.
Okay, but
No. Just the equipment.
so if there's an issue, they bring it back to you guys, or?
With the hardware, we do the installation, and if it doesn't work right, they bring it back to the Mobile Technology Center and they fix it. But we do not maintain the records. That's the police department or sheriff or the individual public safety agency.
Okay, thank
Did
you.
that answer your question?
That answered my question, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Morney?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. And I understand you to say once that you do all of the background investigation and everything, then that sort of eliminates a portion of applicants. I would like to know, when is the last time that you changed the criteria on your requirements to be a dispatcher or a calls handler?
You want me to?
Yes, Char, you can.
Okay. It's hard to get eye contact, if through the Zoom thing. But we went through and we evaluated the minimum qualifications 3 years ago. And we re-evaluated each aspect of what the call taker and dispatcher did. OHRM handles the requirements for the background investigation process, and we rely very much on their expertise with that. And the background investigation process, a lot of times, as I think I wasn't as clear as I should have been, it's a time frame process as opposed to a lot of other issues, because as Director Whittington said, St. Mary's County will do it fast. We do it thoroughly. And in the conversation with Pastor Robinson, he understood very well the need to have a very thorough background investigation process because of the sensitive nature of the job. And did that answer your question?
Sure. Thank you. There's no way we could get a copy of what the requirements are, right?
I don't even have a copy of that. The minimum calls, yes, but not the background process.
Oh, okay. So we really don't have. So, but when you advertise the position, it has what the qualifications are.
Yes.
What must be met?
For the job minimum qualifications, yes. And that is online. You can look at that. It's the job announcement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just have two questions for you. One is going back to Ms. Oriata's question about the mobile crisis center and the police determining who goes where, if the mobile crisis center is necessary. Do you keep track of, does the dispatch center keep track of how many instances that is requested, or any of that information between them? Go ahead, I see you shaking your head. You want to answer that?
No, we don't keep track of that as a statistic. It would just be included in the dispatch records, but it's not anything that we would have readily available.
Okay. Do you have readily available the data for which the police department is called, and which types of calls for service are? Do you have the breakdown for the calls for service for the police department?
We have the CAD records, but we don't. Each agency produces their own reports. So I would need to know a little bit more about.
So let's say someone calls saying someone just broke into my home. Mm-hmm. Do you keep track of that as breaking and entering, and you keep that data set?
That would be a dispatch record, and then it's one of the complications associated with that, which is why we normally refer the calls for service data to the public safety agency responding. And I'm trying to think of an example. If somebody calls and says, there's a noise outside my house, we would dispatch that as an unknown trouble, and that would be the call type. But it could be that it's somebody breaking into a house. It could be a dog. It could be a lot of things. So the dispatch record does not necessarily match the final result of the process. And Gigi, you look like you want to say something.
No, you can keep going.
No,
Okay.
well, go ahead.
Miss Whittington. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, she can go ahead and then I'll add if she doesn't cover it.
Okay. But there's a difference between the initial dispatch and the final resolution of an incident. Could be shots fired and it ends up being fireworks. So, but to answer your question, yes, we do track. We have that as incident records that we track, and that's the data that you saw for the CAD incidents created.
Yeah. Okay. I guess my last question is about we in this organization in this county we have a diverse community and we speak multiple languages. How many dispatchers do you have that speak a second language? And that's my question.
That's one of the.
And then how do you if you don't have a person that speaks a different language other than English and Spanish, how do you then communicate with that person? This
is something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm very glad that you asked that question. We have a limited number of people that speak second languages. We have people that speak Farsi. We have people that speak Spanish. We have people that speak German. But there's not enough people to answer and process each language that comes into the 911 center. Each year for County Council, we provide statistics on the number of languages and the number of calls that come in for the language interpreter service. And we average between 92 and 95 languages every year, ranging from Spanish to French to Vietnamese to Navajo. And there's just no way that we could have enough people in the center to process those calls. So we have a very, very, very excellent call translation service company. It's called Seracom. And they have set up the best technology that I could possibly think of. And in speaking with people in the industry, they agree that we have a very excellent translation service. And we're able to have somebody on the phone within 5 to 10 seconds to provide translation services. Prior to that, we had to place somebody on hold, and it would be 30 to 45 seconds to get somebody on the phone to begin the translation services. And in an emergency, that's just unacceptable. So this vendor is really great. 5 to 10 seconds to get somebody on the phone, and they provide translation services, not interpretation services. And we had that problem in the past too. So to answer your question, we do have people that have a second language, but the vendor that we have to provide translation services can provide it faster than anybody we could possibly have on scene.
Last question, I promise. This just came up because as you're talking about how you code certain costs for service, it seems, how often are the codes updated? And when was the last time the codes were updated? And does the police department or public safety work with you in order to change those codes to be more to update them?
We enter call types based on what the public safety agencies require. The most frequent changes are with the fire department. They have updates to their processes frequently. The police department sends code updates and call type updates on a regular basis, and we adjust accordingly to meet their requirements. So probably, I don't know, at least within the past 6 months to a year.
Thank you. DCAO Jackson.
Good evening. How are you?
Hello. Good.
I just am not clear on a question that was answered earlier, and it's regarding the mobile crisis unit. At first, I thought I heard you say that your dispatchers make a decision based on criteria that has been provided by the police department. Is it that, or is it that the officer, or is it that? Let me just ask that question.
It's based on a request by the police officer or sheriff's deputy.
In the moment?
Yes.
So not based on criteria that you already have?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing other questions, we want to thank you. And if you can stick around, maybe there might be some questions later on. We will appreciate that. But thank you for being here. So we have our next presentation from the Prince George's Crisis Response System, the affiliated Asante Group. We have Mr. James Drake, the director, and Miss Michelle Grisby Hackett, who will be presenting in front of us today. Mr. Drake?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so you have a presentation, correct?
I do, and I sent it earlier, and do I have the ability to share my screen?
Yeah, we're going to share it, and it's going to pop up in a second. So then
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so thank you so much. Let me first start by saying, as you all are aware, very busy week. So I put this presentation in mind to the focal point of the emails I saw on Monday, more specifically asking for questions that have a lot of nuance to them data-wise. So we were able to scrap together what we could preliminarily, but just know if we need to send in a second or more comprehensive report, we can do that. We just didn't have the ability to do that this week. So I'm ready for the next slide. So speaking to that, let me just highlight some of the things that you will not see in this specific report. I also emailed a report of what we typically pull on a monthly basis as well. So that should be available to you all, or it may be distributed later. However, some of the things that are missing in this particular report is we did not do a yearly annual breakdown from 2015 to 2020. In May of this year, we moved to a new system, a new electronic monitoring system. We also updated several different processes, software updates, hardware updates throughout our entire company. Asante, if you're not familiar, hopefully you are. It's a very large company, so it's about 500 employees across many different counties and regions of the state of Maryland. So Prince George's is just one of those areas. So there were massive updates going along. So a lot of our information is in the secondary storage that is in an old system that we'd have to pull and retrieve from. Other things that aren't broken down in some of the data that I was able to put here are the differences between dispatches between sheriff's departments or municipalities or between Prince George's Police Department. So there are subtle differences of how things are come in and out, and that was not acknowledged in this report just because it was too difficult to pull in this time. Other things it doesn't account for are changes that have happened due to our accrediting body, which is CARF, and then also COMAR changes and regulations. And one I should have put in there also the Maryland board changes in introspect of the licensing board for counselors and social workers and how they can work in the field and how they can work as interns on sites. So some of those changes have a small impact on our data, but it's not reflected in what you'll see. And then again, we moved to a new electronic medical system. We moved to Credible from a homegrown electronic medical system in May. So I don't have any data that is from May till the present date. So everything is more of a wash, brief overview of some major points from 2015 to 2020. Next slide. And I should say, Michelle, if you have anything to add before I go on. Okay, I'll continue. So just broad number wise, the total amount of intakes, and for us, an intake is also a phone call. So again, this presentation was more about some of the raw data, but I have other presentations and slides. So either through questions or after this, we can send either a one report that includes everything all together, or we can answer your questions and send those supplicant reports now, because I can email those. But when we, for a total number of police calls that we received from 2015 to 2018, and that's up to May, was 3,508 calls. And our process, we've moved to a new process, but even in the old one, when we get a call for dispatch from law enforcement or from 911 dispatch, we respond. So there is no screen out process for that. If we get a call, we are activated. Of these calls, because I just did a brief poll, I could only confirm that 63 of them were from PGPD. What that means is the others were either because we could not account for the district or the police department, or it probably was from a municipality or a sheriff's department. Out of that total 3,508 phone calls that we received, the total dispatches that were completed were 2,471. And so what we mean by completed is oftentimes when we receive phone calls or dispatches from 911 or from law enforcement, what could happen is within the next 2 to 5 minutes, that call is canceled, or we could arrive on scene, and then depending on the situation, and I can get to this a little later because there are layers here, it could be a situation where we have a consumer in the community whose whereabouts unknown, meaning we have called by law enforcement or 911 dispatch to respond. It was a situation that was low acuity, so law enforcement were not on scene. And when we went to engage in the call, there was nobody there on scene. Doesn't happen often, but that is part of some of the difference between the 3,508 and the 2,471. Other times it can be incomplete. Most common reason is we've arrived on scene, we're with law enforcement, we are engaging with the community and the consumer, trying to support their needs, provide screening and assessment, and they are denying our services or refusing to participate in that support. Next slide. Okay, so of those big raw numbers of dispatches, here's the age breakdown of what those look like. As you can see on the bottom, there's usually a big unknown area. That's across 5 years. That happens for a lot of reasons. More importantly, they usually happen because the consumer themselves has refused to give us their age, so it remains unknown. And when we're dealing with a crisis on the dispatch scene, the most important thing for us is that we can keep the individual safe or the family safe, keep ourselves safe, and then provide support for their need. So there are times when we are unable to get the age of the person that we're serving and supporting. But otherwise, you'll see the different ages in here. The biggest number tends to be between 22 and 40, which is a huge age range, I know. But in that number, if with a deeper dive, we could give you the actual age of each individual there. But that's just more of the overall pool. Next slide. Okay, here's the breakdown by gender. Unknown is a category that could have many reasons. With a more comprehensive report, we could break that down. Looking at it with the naked eye here, I can attribute a lot of that to very few have to do with anyone who identifies as something other than male or female. More often it's because we had to support somebody either over the phone, they refused our services, or when we dispatched out, they were unavailable or not on scene when we arrived. Next slide. Outcomes. So these outcomes are a reflection of just our interactions with working with law enforcement on scene or being dispatched by 911 dispatch over the last 5 years. So let's talk through a couple of them and just kind of break down what that means. So one of the middle numbers, emergency petition, these are how many individuals had to be hospitalized. And in that process, just so you know, when we dispatch, our dispatchers always have to screen and assess on every site location that they come on. So there's always an active screening for immediate safety, any major risk factors. That would include substance abuse, that would include suicide, that would include homicidal ideation, that would include psychosis from an acute to chronic state level. That would also include any other reckless behaviors that could be a risk, runaway behavior, attributes that are not directly tied to an immediate risk situation, but could lead to one further down the road. So those were situations where people, there was a high level safety risk situation. And for us, it is always the process to try to divert from hospital, commissioner's office, and jail. So our next step in that is, once we've identified the safety risk, how can we partner with that consumer in the community and engage them in a safety plan to keep them safe? So these are situations where one of two things happen. One, either the risk level was so high that the most appropriate response was hospitalization, or two, the acuity was still high and the individual was unwilling to work with us on a safety plan or a support plan that would keep them safe in the community. And that's in a 24-hour time period. So in those situations, we're enacting an emergency petition. At risk for safety, 3, what that attributes to is those are individuals who definitely at risk for safety, but we were able to defer them in some other way. We don't see a lot in that category. Typically, if it's an at risk for safety, that is more than enough grounds for an emergency petition. So it's not low level, but we were able to defer. Typically, what we see is we see at least a step lower than the high criteria of emergency petition, and either the ability to safety plan in a number of different ways. Incomplete or canceled dispatches, 337, that could accumulate for several different reasons, which could include dispatches being canceled by 911 or by law enforcement, not being able to screen and assess an individual because either their acuity is so high they're unable to participate, even if willing, or second, they were refusing or unwilling. And then the last box of that could be because they weren't there. Stable with support is just like it sounds. That means that there was a supportive family member, loved one, or friend on scene at the time of our arrival with law enforcement. And stable without support is the opposite. With police at the time of the call, that means that when we received the call, law enforcement were already on scene with the individual or family that we were supporting. And then unknown, and this can also account for several different areas that doesn't happen very often, but these are the situations where we can't get information on scene or people are whereabouts unknown all in the same package. And let me also say, with just these numbers over the last 5 years, these primarily account for dispatches that involve 911 dispatch or law enforcement. For PG, majority of our calls come from the community. They do not come from law enforcement. So most of our calls are initiated by an institution, a school, a parent, a family member, an adult, and sometimes even a child from the community. That could be directly or third party. Next slide. Okay, and these are some of the direct questions I just saw in the email, so I wanted to kind of address those. So I attached in a report with this PowerPoint as well that gave a more comprehensive breakdown of what we pull on a monthly basis. And to just kind of speak to that briefly, some of the things that we pull on a monthly basis go into 4 different categories. So one would be volumes of service, and that would include how many cases are open from our phone or hotline or from our mobile team that dispatches out. How many cases were opened by our stabilization team that works with children and family. how many cases opened by hospital diversion, cases opened by police or community education, and anything that's a phone call attaches to a case. It's very limited that we have situations where people call us just for a phone number for another service. So when we get a phone call, our goal is to engage, open a case, and supply services and support for them. And I should also tell you that within our crisis system, our services, we have about 6 or 7. So we have a breadth of different services. Mobile dispatch and the hotline are just 2 of those services. So we do have stabilization services that dispatch out for children and family. We do have an urgent care. It is limited, but we do have one that includes a psychiatry doctor that is board approved for children and adults. We also have urgent care for therapy. We have an outreach program. We provide CIT training for law enforcement. That outreach program is for anyone within PG County who requested that could get training and support and questions answered. And then we also have.
Can I just stay on this question real quick? Because I think the question is more along the lines of when your agency is called out on a particular call from the Prince George's County Police Department, they want you there because of an incident that's occurring with a person with a behavioral disability. What data during that call do you collect? Do you collect race of that person, gender of that person? Do you collect the type of mental illness they have?
Yes, we collect their insurance information.
Let me finish my question. Okay. What other pieces of data do you collect from that? Do you collect whether it ends in a use of force incident? What information do you collect from that? And I think specifically, we would like to know what you collect from when you arrive on a scene. What information do you take back from that incident?
Okay, so yeah, the data that we can collect includes their insurance information, how many incoming and outgoing calls that we have, follow-up that we have, scheduled up appointments, do they have current or past providers, do they have a legal history, do they have a family history, what other supports can we engage in with them. As far as hands-on, we don't have a direct hands-on or use of force, but I would say that anytime you're completing an emergency petition that does involve a law enforcement officer handcuffing the consumer to securely transport them to the hospital, which is why that's always the last resort. So the emergency petition process in itself, that's completed. Bare minimum, that's the number of times that someone had to be handcuffed. Now, typically when we're working with officers on the scene and that situation happens, we're asking that they handcuff in the front. We're usually working with the consumer themselves so that they know what's coming and it's happening. Law enforcement is there with them. So typically they're willing to allow themselves to be handcuffed. Very rarely are we in a situation where somebody is just irate or violent in that situation, but that does happen. They sit in the front seat of the vehicle and then we drive and meet them at the hospital to give report to the doctor and nurse. So as far as direct use of force data, no, but the emergency petition process does involve handcuffing. We do follow-up calls on every case. So the average case life is about 14 days, but within that time frame, we're doing multiple follow-ups. We're engaging in linkage and resource information, coping skills. So the dispatch itself does not end our service, support, or interaction with the individual or the community member. It's the follow-up that is really the most important aspect of it. So we average about 780 dispatches a year. We do about 15,000 outgoing calls a year. We probably get in about 5,000 to 6,000 incoming calls a year. And this is all with a staff of about 30 people to cover a county of almost 1 million. So we pull in data to say what's their stability, have they been in their system before, are they a high utilizer, are they using services from other providers in the community. We grab their demographic data, where they live, what district, what law enforcement was available to us. Did they agree to services? Were they resistant? We also note what was the particular issue. Was it suicidal ideation? Was it depression? Was it a mental health? Or was it a behavioral based? Was it medical based? So as far as the data goes, it's extremely comprehensive and there's lots of it. And we try to gather everything, including the outcome of the situation. And regardless of the outcome, that dispatch does not end the interaction of the service.
Okay, let's keep going, and then we'll take questions at the end. I wanted to make sure that we made that clear, but I'm not sure how many more slides you have, but we can keep
4 or
going.
5, I think should be good.
Great.
Next slide. Okay. Number of times called for service annually, that number was 3,508 over the last 5 years. I would say that there are lots of different barriers that we encounter within the county and in the system, also law enforcement and 911 dispatch as well. We have a great relationship, but we are more or less underutilized. Next slide. Gender breakdown, that was included in slides 4 and 5 that showed the different ages. Okay. And then in slide 6, that spoke about the unknown categories, the at-risk for safety. This was really the outcome. So how many people were emergency petitioned, how many people had incomplete or canceled dispatches, how many were stable with support, how many were stable without support. All of that is extremely important for the follow-up information. And next slide. And yeah, as far as use of force, we don't keep direct data. Typically, we are used more as a community response, and then police call us directly for one of 2 situations. They may call us for a mental health direct situation, but what we have seen over the last 4 or 5 years, and especially since COVID, is we do not get called just for mental health situations. We can get called for a variety of different situations. It could be something involving a behavioral incident. It could be something involving somebody's medical concern. It could be someone who's homeless. It could be someone who's on substances. More or less, it's anything across the board that is perceived as a crisis for that individual. It is not purely mental health. When we arrive on scene, we are always doing a mental health screening and assessment, providing services, safety planning, and trying to strategically plan follow-up and get them connected. However, a lot of the service requests are not mental health based. More specifically, we have a client need fund. So a lot of times we'll get called just to give somebody a grocery gift card so they can get groceries. We provide temporary housing as well if they're homeless, they don't have a place to stay, and it's past the time where they can get into a shelter on a daily basis. So it's no direct data on use of force, but we do get called for multiple things that range way outside of just mental health. Next slide. Yeah, so as far as our dispatch times, this speaks to more specifically police departments and police PGPD. So when we receive a call, we dispatch, we go. 2 limitations to this: when you have a team of 30 covering a county this big, PG County gets calls in bunches. So what that means is it's feast or famine. From 8 to 10 in the daytime, it could be no calls. You get to 1 to 3, you might have 6 calls with 4 happening at the same time. So the more of the difficulty that we have is that we can't be in more than one place at once. We have enough funding to support 1 team at every shift 24/7 hours a day. So only 2 times a day do I have more than 1 shift team or individual available to work. So for our hotline, we have 1 person managing the hotline for their 8-hour shift, 24 hours a day. During the day, I have a 2nd person that can help them support the activity on the line. For dispatch teams, there's always teams of 2. Everybody has to be licensed, as is a Maryland board rule. So have to have licensed individuals. We are on the process of trying to gather and gain peer support that can also be support agents on our teams of 2. So they dispatch in teams of 2. They go out with police radios, iPads, cell phones, materials to do their job and pass out resources and in a vehicle. But within our contract, our dispatch times gives us up to an hour. We try to cut that in half. So we dispatch in about 30 minutes. And the difficulty is when we have a county our size, if we're dispatched in Clinton and then the next call comes in and it's in Laurel, unfortunately, it's going to take us more than 30 minutes to get there because there's no way around it. So the redirection of teams from one site to the next is difficult with a community-based team. So what that aspires to is sometimes with police departments, they don't want to wait, which makes sense. So if it's a low-risk issue, they will cancel a dispatch occasionally because they don't want to wait for the time to take us to get there. Or what they'll do is they'll still request a dispatch, but they will leave the scene themselves. So we'll arrive on scene without them. And sometimes, depending on the acuity, we may have to call them back. Other times we're able to secure the needs and support for that individual without calling law enforcement back. But that's just a limitation of having a community-based mobile team is at some point, you're always going to have to work out how you're going to manage arrival times. Next slide.
Further, just, with our police contracts, we have a contract with police that covers our evening shift and overnight. So, and that is the direct, we have a direct police line too, that the calls come through that James can speak directly to.
Yes. Challenges for taking calls safely across the board, whether it's police or not. So we have a community-based team. That means that primary calls come from the community in various ways, or they come direct from 911 dispatch or police. Most of the calls that come into our system are third party. That means that they're coming from someone who is not the individual in distress. So the easiest example is it could be a parent calling for their adult child who lives in another part of the city or another part of the county, or it could be an 80-year-old grandmother calling about her 60-year-old son, and they live in the same home. Now, the person that we're going to serve and support may be in an active crisis or distress. They may be having a psychosis breakdown, or they may be at risk to themselves or others, but they're not aware that we're coming. So that's always a difficult situation to navigate. What we tend to do is we try to gather as much information as possible from the caller so that we can be safe dispatching. If the situation is ambiguous or there's a clear safety reason, we would go on law enforcement. So as it goes as a joint dispatch, meaning we arrive to the scene and call law enforcement when we get there. The second area for third-party calls is if it's an immediate danger situation. Someone's calling, somebody has a gun, they're trying to shoot me, somebody has a knife, they're trying to stab me. That's an immediate 911 call. If it's a medical issue that's immediate, I can't breathe, that's an immediate call for EMS. Those are the times when we would have to call ahead of us arriving to a scene. Ambiguous calls. These ones tend to look more like what we see today during COVID, meaning we get a call, there's enough information to know that we need to dispatch and respond, but not enough information sometimes to even locate an individual or know how to help. So case in point, we'll get calls from supervisors in the school district who are reporting third, fourth hand that there's a counselor talking with the student virtually. They're talking about suicide, police and the team. So in those situations, the information is ambiguous. We have to respond, but we don't have adequate information. That happens a lot. That is a big challenge of gathering information, and on a deeper level, it impacts our data, because the most important thing for us is to respond to the safety issue and make sure people are secure and safe and connected. And sometimes if we can't get the information, it's hard to get it later. The third thing is lack of adequate services and referrals. So Prince George's County, like many in the state of Maryland, some do well, some do better than others, but we have a couple struggles and services that just aren't available across the board. Children's psychiatric and hospitals really does not appear to exist here. So when we have a situation where a child is at risk and they're at a high acuity, and the best course of action is hospitalization, we have no choice but to go to DC or Baltimore because we cannot provide service or find service in county. And that includes urgent care.
Hey, Mr. Drake, I see we have a lot of questions in the chat. I wanted to see if you can go to the next slide and talk about more of the challenges you face for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and then we can take questions right after that, because I know those are going to spark additional questions. So just want to prepare you for that. But
next slide. Yeah. Okay, so here are some of the additional problems that we face in the county in general. And I think just about everybody faces them. What I heard from the 911 presentation mirrored a lot of our same struggles: infrastructure issues, collaboration, funding, and staffing. Those are the big five. Infrastructure, to give you an example, we do a lot in the county. There's a lot of support services. One of the main problems is they all work in silos. So very few of those programs are actually working together. From contract proposal to finished product, there might be a contract that is bid on for the county or the state. They receive the funding, but that funding has only been communicated to that one provider. No one else knows about it, and they may have made a contract that asks for support from other services in other ways that they weren't on the table to agree to. Case in point, you could have an expansion in crisis bids at a substance abuse location. There may be someone who's able to provide that service. They get the contract from the state. They've said that they're going to partner with the community, but that discussion of partnering with the community didn't take place before the contract was finalized. So now you have an approved contract, and now you're trying to find the support you should have built in before the contract was approved. That's one of the ways. A second way is there's no communication with emergency services. And this is a problem all the way around. One of the proposals I think that we've submitted is that we have a software infrastructure that allows us to have communication just with emergency services. So if it's 911 dispatch, if it's police, if it's EMS, if it's the emergency room at the hospitals, it's not a software that's going to force you to learn a new system, but it's just going to give you an overlay button. So as you take information and you're requesting services, you can press a button and everybody who needs to be communicated with to respond to an emergency is communicated with at the same time. It saves you phone calls, it saves you having to track and chase people down, and it saves you having a failed attempt of responding back on the outcome. Collaboration. So we have some great relationships with the police department. One of the struggles we have is, as a third-party vendor, we don't have a county or a police direct email. So what that means is, despite the great relationship I might have, if I have a particular relationship with a police grant monitor and they retire or they move to a different position, I now have to start from scratch and I have to figure out who the new person is, which does not maintain the support that we need. So one of the main problems is you build relationships in this county, and when people move position or resign, those relationships kill whatever partnership was happening that was working, because they die with the relationship instead of being a continual system. So one of the easy things I said there is, if we at least just had a direct email to police department, I could look through our directory to see who the new person was and establish contact myself to maintain the support and the level of communication we need to really address these problems. Funding, I know everybody is kind of dealing with this. We're finding creative ways to work it out. However, the honest truth is we haven't had an increase in our funding in 20 years. So as cost of living continues to increase, it becomes more difficult, as the 911 call dispatch service suggested, to hire and sustain workers. The problems are two-tiered. One, people can find jobs that pay the same amount for less hassle than having to dispatch in the community to support people in the middle of crises. Second is there are more competitive jobs around that they can flow to. So the problem that we're having is sustainability and also getting people in. And so it's constantly difficult because of the wages. And that leads to the staffing part too. Training is also difficult because it takes time to really train somebody. You have to think that when you're dealing with crises, there's always a level of things that happen outside of the protocol that happen outside of the structure of what you can prepare them for. So regardless of the credentials and the bells and whistles and how much education they have, it really does take at least 6 months to get somebody properly seasoned, to know how to handle people, to be soft, to be accountable, to be thorough, and to leave people with a great response. That takes time to build. So it's devastating when you lose staff so quickly.
Mr. Drake, thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it. We know that, on top with this social justice movement that's happening now, on top of, the racial equity in policing movement that's occurring, the mental health services provided by public safety or through public safety is extremely important as well. So that's why we thought it was important that you attend this meeting. So I'm going to ask our chair of one of the subcommittees to ask the first question, Ms. Florence Felix Lawson.
Hi, thank you, Delegate. I'm actually going to get myself off the video. Mr. Drake, thank you so much for your presentation. We have quite a few questions. I'm sorry, one second. I have quite a few questions. The first, you talked about licensure, the problem with staffing and how it's hard to recruit and retain, but you said specifically that workers needed to be licensed. And are you talking about licensed clinical social workers on your team, or is there a different type of license?
Licensed clinical social workers and counselors. So
okay.
It's a two-piece. It's the licensing board. It's also whatever colleges that they're coming through. So if we pull them in even as interns, they may have different requirements from the licensing board depending on the school that they're addressed in. And that makes limitations on how we can use them and offer them training as well.
Okay. And so, and it was surprising to hear that for your staffing, you had 30 individuals and you had one team for 2 shifts. And so that I can see that being some significant challenges, but you said that you had a great relationship with the police department, but that you were underutilized. What do you mean by being underutilized? Because to me, that sounds a little bit different than having some staffing and resource challenges.
Well, it's a great relationship, but the difficulty is when you're addressing those relationships, you're really building those on the command level. And those are great. But the one problem that comes in and I addressed is if someone resigns or leaves or moves position, you have to restart that. The second difficulty is just looking at PGPD. That's 1,300 officers. So getting information from the command level down to the ground level, to the individuals who are on patrol who actually dispatch with us, to the 10 cars that are actually supervising them on the scene who are not the command level, that's a different level of communication. And as a third-party vendor, it's really hard to penetrate that because we can't be involved and embedded in their training process. That happens at the police academy. We have to have an invite. We're always in outside communication. We're not embedded in their process, which makes sense, but it does make for some difficulties on scene.
And I would add to that, with having limited number of teams, dealing with police that are on patrol, that's on the ground, dealing with the situation, and you're possibly facing an MCT team that may be on the southern part of the county, and that's the same team that has to get to the northern part of the county to respond to the call, which could take 45 minutes just because of traffic in and of itself, because there's not enough teams to cover the whole, we don't have additional teams to cover the county adequately. That could leave a patrol person to say, well, I can resolve this quicker on my own and maybe do an emergency petition myself. So I think that also adds to the challenge when you talk about the staff and when you talk about the level of funding in mobile crisis for 20 years, where there hasn't been the ability to expand the number of teams and the staffing that's needed to cover services.
Thank you. And I know that there are some other questions, but I think in my mind, I because we heard from the 911 call center that when the call comes in, it is the way that it's dispatched is by the police officer. So I'm still trying to understand the way you intersect with the 911 call center and the police officers. At one point, because you talked, Ms. Drake, you talked a lot about follow-up, but when, let's say, like there's a 911 call, someone's adult son is suffering from schizophrenia, has threatened everyone in the home. That 911 calls come in. At what point does the what point does the mobile crisis team, and I'm sorry for the background noise, what point does the mobile crisis team get engaged in that call?
If the call did not initiate to us, I really can't speak to that. And more or less what I'm trying to get to with some of these gaps and areas is that they're very complex. It's not law enforcement's doing something wrong or 911's doing something more. There's just natural gaps that happens just on the count of what you have as support services, because 911 dispatch and as well 911 officers, they're limited on staffing too. So you got a whole system where everyone across the board is stretched on their staffing. And but as far as to answer your question, if the call comes direct to 911 dispatch, I can't speak to that process. I'm not a part of that. All I can say is once we do get the call, what we're doing is trying to respond and act. And if we can't, it's because we're on another scene. And so we're letting them know and we're trying to safety plan. But also 911 dispatch has given us the ability to access the supervisor. So if we have a question or something, or if I need to call them, we have the ability to call them directly as well. So we do try to check in with them, find out what's going on, what needs to be helped, what do we need to do to help. And same with law enforcement. So when we can get their 1040 sometimes, or their phone numbers for the direct officer who's on scene. So that's something that we attempt to do. It doesn't always work, but most of that is due to the situation. If you're having an active crisis, the officer may not have the ability to give you a phone number or to go through a lot of details with you. They just need you on scene and you'll get the information you need on scene.
All right, thank you, Mr. Drake.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Drake, can I just ask a quick question? And Ryan, if you don't mind removing the PowerPoint for us, please. Mr. Drake, can you explain how you work with the county? You're the mobile crisis unit, but you also have a contract with the Prince George's County Police Department. Do you also have a contract with the county government to provide services as well? And
I believe our CEO is here, Fred. So I would let him speak to that as well. Or Michelle, because I'm not sure if Fred's on mute.
we can get back to that question once Fred hops on, or if we can get, I think the understanding is that we know that in the police department's budget, they have a line item for your work. We haven't heard from the county government of what they provide for, because in your PowerPoint, you presented other costs of service from throughout the county and self-referrals or family referrals and things of that nature. So I just wonder where that funding is coming from. How do you discern the different two things, and how do you report to the police department on their contract?
So our services are funded through state contracts that the county oversees, and we do have a police contract that again covers a team from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. and then 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. And so we have a direct line that James, you can speak to in terms of, it's called SAM 808, in terms of we have a police radio, we can communicate directly with the police, and that we respond, their calls take priority for the teams that they fund.
Yeah, so the health department and the police department manage our contracts for the most part, yeah.
Got it. So health department and police department, got it, okay.
Right.
So Ms. Jackson, we'll come to you in a second. I'm sure you have some questions about this. We're gonna go to Ms. Yamek Gutierrez, who's been waiting patiently.
Actually, I think my question was answered, unless there's anything else to add as to what we can do to increase police officer referrals. Is it just the delay in your ability to respond and the funding related to that? Or are there any other suggestions that you have to offer the work group as to how officers can increase the amount of referrals to this mobile crisis unit?
Yeah, I do have a couple of ideas. There are some easy lift things and there's some heavy lift things. So the heavy lift things, we can have separate conversations because that involves the entire infrastructure. Easy things for me and what we're working on now is just getting a direct email with law enforcement. Just having that ability to scroll through the directory and having an email that shows up from police, I think will make a world of difference in the communication line. So a current monitor with the police department is working on that. Hopefully we can get that up soon. I think that in itself could do a tremendous change. Because like I said, the relationship really is great, but for us to do the work it takes to maintain that relationship all the way down to the ground level of patrol, we really need to have a way to stay tightly communicating. So I think that's an easy lift. Anyone have a question?
Was your question answered, Ms. Gutierrez?
Was that it? It sounded like you had other suggestions.
We have a couple others. So with our CIT process, it's a little difficult right now because of COVID specifically. So CIT is the training model for law enforcement. It is a model that for our county is, I think we need to make a couple tweaks to make it work. One of the barriers for law enforcement, and this is really a natural barrier, this is nothing that they've done wrong, but that training is 40 hours. It's a whole week. So the issue with that is when you have limited police staff across your county and you have different municipalities and different things, it's hard to get law enforcement to come to a training that mandates 40 hours a week in the middle of everything else they have to do. So my proposal was adding some virtual trainings, adding things that we can do. It doesn't take the place of that. We still have to do that, but we need to find additional ways to get them training that works with their time frame. So if we had a virtual training that's approved and accredited and it hits a certain aspect of support for them, or maybe even just a few, that they had a 30-day time frame that hit and they could do in different pieces, that would work a lot better than having one training that only hits 40 hours a week.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, Mr. Drake, we want to hear it all. We want to hear the big suggestions you have, the small ones, the easy ones. We want to hear the difficult suggestions you may have. If you can send that to us as well, if any suggestions you might have, that would be great as well. But, you know, we're here to make recommendations. And this is one of the major things that our community members ask for during our public hearing. And I'm sure they're asking for it continuously. So we want to hear your recommendations, honestly. Let's go to Ms. Morning.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Mr. Drake. I have a couple of questions and they will be short. The presentation you gave us, you said that over the last 5 years, you've only had 85 calls where you went out with the police. Was that correct?
No, that was 85 where police were already on scene when we got the call.
Okay.
Out of 3,508.
Okay. So in other words, you have handled more calls with the police than these 85.
Yes.
Okay. Number two, I also heard you say that some of the information that you collect about the person that's having the issue is insurance information.
Yes, and the only reason why we would do that, because our services are free, but if we're making outside referrals, most of that is dependent on what insurance they have. So it behooves us to gather that information so that we can make the right referrals if it's more than just an in-house need.
Okay, but if they don't have insurance, it doesn't matter. They're going to get services, right?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah, services happen no matter what, but we're trying to root for the long haul, and most of our services are bridge services, so they last temporarily until we secure them into a long-term service. So our goal is to try to get that process started from the beginning.
Okay. My last question is, your office only serves Prince George's County, right?
Yes, our site does, but the company as a whole, we're in several other locations.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ms. Oriata.
Yeah, I have a few questions. Thank you. And I I can't keep it to one. But as the delegate mentioned, I think just thank you for your work. I think this is super important. And to the point you made about being underutilized, I think it's going to be a big part of our recommendations, really understanding like how to make sure that this program is utilized more. And so I just want some clarity on a few things. So when you talked about the calls and you said that I think was 3,508 calls, that's not the total calls over 5 years. Is that all the calls over 5 years or just only the calls that came through the police department?
That's only the calls that came through the police department.
What's the total? Do you have that?
I don't have the total for the last 5 years. I could have that, but we typically average just over 5,000 incoming, and we make double the outgoing calls that we receive in.
So you average like 5,000 incoming, not from the police annually?
Yes.
Outside, okay. And then, so the average, obviously, if it's 3,000 spread over 5 years, that came from the police. That's helpful. And if you could provide that data for us just to be able to analyze would be helpful. Similar to understanding like the shift breakdown, because you talked about what the police contract pays for. So just trying to understand if the total department is 30, period, with 2 groups on shift, period, or is that what you're saying is just dedicated to answering calls for police?
Yeah, so 30 staff total.
Okay.
But each shift that's a dispatch team is 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hotline, it's 1 person on the hotline per shift. And then we have 4 shifts per day. So 8 to 4, 4 to midnight, no, 3 shifts per day. 8 to 4, 4 to midnight, midnight to 8 a.m.
And is there any way we can get a chart that has the shift breakdown, how many people are assigned per those different shifts?
Yes.
So I think that would be helpful as we make recommendations moving forward. And I'm assuming all the dispatches are from one location in the county? Like you have one place that you're located?
Oh, yeah, so our office is centrally located in Lanham,
Mm-hmm.
and we disperse from there everywhere else we need to go.
Yeah, we service the whole county. So we have our home base is out of Lanham, but we respond to the whole county.
Okay, and then a follow-up question from the delegate's question about the budget. If we could get a breakdown, I think that would be helpful to understand how much money you guys are getting in total from if it's the state versus the health department versus the police department, if we're looking at the increase of budget. And then out of curiosity, because you're in so many different jurisdictions, if you have recommendations from other jurisdictions where you have a higher volume of calls that come in from the police, like what does that staff look like? What's that ratio? What's that budget? I think it would be helpful if you have any comparative jurisdictions that you guys are located in, that we could look at that type of information.
I can speak to that real easily in the different systems. So we're in 12 counties across Maryland, and we're also in North Carolina. Baltimore, the Baltimore program is huge, and they're doing twice our annual numbers in a month. So Baltimore's, and they have a police-based system where ours is a community-based hybrid, which is different. So that means there's a clinician with a police officer sitting in the car and they're going out on everything. Where our system is, we go out as a team, and if we need law enforcement, we'll call them to the scene, or if law enforcement wants us, they'll call us to a scene.
Thank you. And one last question.
I'm sorry, just to expand on that, in Baltimore, they have 6 teams a day. So that also tells the difference in terms of, we may have 1 team per shift, whereas in Baltimore, again, with the higher volume and being police-based and covering a greater county, covering that county. But that just shows a very different between 1 team per shift versus they have 6 teams. So they're doing roughly two teams per shift, which is helpful in covering a large county.
Thank you, that is helpful.
The other thing I would say, the big left stuff that I think would be most helpful for police, dispatch, and us as well, is the support systems in between. So right now, there are your community services in PG County, and then there's your hospitals and your jails. But all the secondary step in between services are missing. So having a crisis center, having a drop-off location, having urgent care. Those things give you more options, and I think build natural buy-in from everybody because there's a place to go, and it's more streamlined.
That's helpful. And that last question is like just understanding what are the list of the type of calls that as an organization would be in your purview. Because you listed a couple of different things, but if you have that like in documentation form that we could see, I think that would be helpful. And then what are those free services that you offer? And then what are those that are triggered by needing insurance? And if you don't have it right now, that's fine, but I think that would be good information for us to have as we're trying to think about recommendations.
Absolutely, we can provide that to you. All of our services are free across the board. It's just from the crisis side, they don't last forever.
Right.
So it's just when we're referring out that we need to know the insurance. But we
right.
But
to your point, like they don't last. So for example, if you had a service, but it's only a week, right? Like us knowing that, and then past that, someone would need to pay, I think would be helpful. So really understanding like what you guys can provide for free before there's a cost associated to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can provide information on our array of services that again are all free to county residents. And then just in terms of our linkage to community or outpatient providers, and give you an idea of the system outside of us that costs. That doesn't necessarily directly impact the services we provide, because again, ours are free, but it does in making decisions on linking people to longer term care, ongoing care outside of us. Sure.
Yeah, that's perfect.
As far as it's a first responder model. So we don't define the crisis, the community and the police do. So when we get a call, we go. That's how it is. A lot of times that results in mental health or substance abuse or behavioral or a blend of medical. But if it's squarely mental health, we're the most equipped. And if it's substance abuse, we're equipped too. But some of the other areas are compounded by COVID. So right now, even the low risk calls are just as acute as the high risk suicidal or homicidal or psychosis stuff, because people are without resources, they're struggling with jobs and housing. So everything is very high acuity right now, regardless of the type of call that comes in.
Got it. Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you. And I too appreciate the work that you all are doing. Just two quick requests for data. And one is, do you maintain data on the number of calls that you have to refuse? So the police call you and you're unable to get to that call. That would be helpful. Do you maintain those numbers?
Yeah, those will be calls that we have to safety plan and delay and defer. Yes, we track data on those things too. And that's becoming a greater problem now because we're dispatching more because of COVID and because we have limited teams to be everywhere.
Yeah, that'll help us, I think, help judge the need. So if you could send that, that would be great. And then do you maintain data across police districts in the county? So where you're going?
We just started that with this new system. So we did not have the district information. Prior, we were doing police surveys that would happen annually that would go to the state that would kind of encapsulate all that information. So be like 30 different information data points in that. But no, we did not have districts until more recent. So that's something that's new.
Okay, whatever you have would be helpful. Thank you.
And I just wanted to just, again, thank you, but let me just ask a couple of questions for you. Can you just speak to your relationship with PGPD? Again, as Ms. Florence, Ms. Felix Lawson asked the question about you saying that you're underutilized, you also need a direct email address. What is that dynamic? What is that relationship right now? How are you communicating with them? What is your relationship like, and what should it look like?
Okay, so we have a grant monitor with the police department right now. That is Captain James Mitchell. So he's my direct contact. Some of the difficulties come in play simply because of the structure of being a vendor, because you're not directly a state or county entity. So you're almost on the outside from the get-go. But so that relationship means when situations happen or I have a question or high acuity, I go to him first. And then it travels to whatever silo or direct person it needs to. When we're on scene and we're dealing with a police officer and their 10 car or their supervisor, we call them directly and then relay that information back to Captain Mitchell. He gets stats on what we're doing every month as well. So everything happens from directly me and the contract manager. Here and there, we'll get special requests for training or for access or for outreach, and then they participate in CIT, which happens 4 times a year. It's a 40-hour training for a week, 40 seats available. So there are some areas where we can improve an easy lift there, and then also the biggest thing is getting things from the command level down to the ground level. And it's harder right now because I think COVID has made things that were small problems, big problems, and things that were a bigger problem all more exposed. So right now, because of COVID, they're not doing their normal roll calls, which is shift change for law enforcement. You can go onto that site, meet with law enforcement, talk to them directly. They're doing that more by Zoom. So not having that direct contact right now with COVID is also difficult too, because everybody's trying to scramble to make changes and adjust for what's needed in the community. And I think it's hard for everybody.
You said something else earlier that was kind of alarming to me, which was that you can't get the police department in front of you to conduct the training that you believe seem to be necessary. During their 9 months of training, which is the longest in the state of Maryland, you or someone from your group has not been involved in that training of officers in the beginning of their onboarding and their training in the first 9 months of them becoming a police officer? Can you speak to that?
Yes, no. So CIT is considered an out-service training. It's not a part of their in-service now. So this has been going on for a while. I think most of the setup that we have most currently was under Chief Sanuski. So under this new interim chief, I think there's more flexibility, but there's also more difficulty because of COVID trying to get a process in. But then the difficulty that I think law enforcement have, and I think is real, is there are pieces of that CIT training that can be implemented another way. The whole 40 hours does not have to be completed in person, which I think is a heavy lift for a police department that is also stretched and understaffed. So I would wish we could break that up, but CIT themselves has not approved a virtual platform for that training. So we're in a place now where even the CIT that we normally could provide, we can't provide right now. So we're doing individual by city and trainings with law enforcement because we don't have a way to train them in the certified way. It's not even because of them, it's because of CIT.
Got it. And do you communicate with the social workers that are within the Prince George's County Police Department at all?
Yes, psych services. We communicate directly. So when they hold trainings, they invite us and we provide them.
I'm sorry, maybe I said the wrong one. I'm sorry. I meant when you're speaking to folks who have like a trained degree in mental health and de-escalation training, do you actually communicate with those folks on a consistent basis that are at the Prince George's County Police Department?
We communicate with their psych services who has counselors and social workers. So that would be my line of communication. I don't know if there's other entities outside of that, but their psychological services, yes.
Got it. Last question, Ms. Oriata.
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question, and I apologize. I lost track of it. I'm trying to read it in my notes. Oh, it was a question about the training, because you said you don't do the training on the front end. I'm just curious about that because a lot of, I would assume the training that you would provide is around de-escalation and dealing with people with mental health issues. And so not being able to train officers at the front end and dealing with more veteran officers that already have habits and ways of operating, that might be a barrier. So I'm just curious about, have you guys tried and talked about moving to training at the academy so that you're, at the front end when officers are learning how to interact with the community instead of trying to untrain bad habits?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me speak to it this way as well. The psychological services for the police also provide training for law enforcement. So they do have in-house training. I can't speak to that what that training is, but it does include de-escalation in other areas. So I believe that psychological services is embedded in the front end. We would love to be embedded in the front end as well with the academy, but I think that could be a part of it, is that the psych services are handling the training in-house as well, and then we're providing the out-service CIT.
Mr. Drake, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate you. And I think, we sent a list of questions to you. I know in the beginning of the slides, you mentioned that you couldn't answer them all right now, but if you can get us that data and information, I think it'll be really helpful for that subcommittee. And I'm sure they're going to be reaching out to you again to come to their subcommittee meeting to discuss this very topic again. And so for people at home, this isn't the last time that we will be discussing mental health. But we will be, so they will be back in front of us to answer some more questions and be able to refine our recommendations. So with that, I want to say thank you again, and thank you to all our presenters, Judge Lamassney.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Drake, not just for your presentation, but for the job you do. It's very, very difficult. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I also sent you guys a report already earlier today, so that has a monthly breakdown of what we typically pull. So mirror that.
Well, thank you very much, everyone at home. And so please stay safe, and we'll see you next time. I will ask our members to stay on for a brief session for 3 minutes if they can, after we end our live session.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.